Hello everyone and welcome back to Anything Joe's, a collaborative journey through the world of G.I. Joe. My name is Greg Engel.
And I'm Jaren Decker.
And we'll be your host today. Today on Anything Joe's, we're going to get caught up on some news. We're going to talk about some other stuff we've been working with in our assorted hobby rooms. Jaren, we missed a really great day to record because yesterday and the day before, I've been fighting a sinus infection or some such, and my voice sounded real cool the last 2 days, and I guess today where I'm starting to drain a little more, now I just sound like a sick wet cat.
I think you sound cool all the time, Greg.
So I apologize if I am out of it a little bit, or if I just don't sound like I usually do. I am feeling pretty blah. All right, so let's get right into it. Let's take a look at what's going on. Not a lot of news to talk about, but we got a little bit to dig into. Looks like we got some updates from Skeletron. You might remember Skeletron as running the Kickstarter to bring back the Robo Skull from the old Action Force days. And they've been very forthcoming with updates as they've gotten them. And now we have our first test shots of the 2 3 3/4 figures. I guess that's actually just the one, and he's got different loadouts now that I look at them. But yeah, so the retro O-ring Skeletron, it's called the Wolf Trooper, and it is basically a vintage G.I. Joe era style figure. These are cast in red with flesh tone, but I'm assuming, there's a lot of changes still that happen from first shot to, final product. This is just to make sure everything is cast correctly. Do the figures move? Is there anything that needs to be changed before final production begins? Which is exciting because, I've been talking about this project for a long time. I went in pretty hard for me. So any update, is interesting. Now, I am more excited about the modern version of this figure than I am about the vintage one. But I'm not going to deny that this is a super cool figure. If you look at some of these test shots where they're comparing to like other G.I. Joes in the brand, you can see that the figure has a interchangeable head, at least one. One of them actually looks like a skull, and the other looks more like a masked Cobra Trooper. But all the other parts seem to be identical. Unclear if you actually have to take the figure apart and change the head out, or if there's some kind of system that allows you to move them from one to like if they pop off, basically like modern figures do. It also comes with a helmet on this where there's a third one pictured where he has a helmet covering him. So you got quite a bit of versatility with this figure. You could bulk buy these and still, they'd still look a bit different. Their weapons that they come with, they're all clear. I don't know if that is also a test shot deal, or if the final product is, if the weapons are supposed to be clear, but they have like a laser gun or kind of almost flamethrower-y. He has a kind of a pistol, and then he has like a cool Highlander-esque looking sword. So plenty for them to get into. Oh, I guess that's not a pistol. Now that I look at this other shot, it looks like it's hard for me to tell. Some kind of other bladed weapon. It looks like there's 2 sides to it because he's blocking an attack with it. I mean, these look really good. I'm not going to lie. Maybe some of the best actual vintage style figures that I've seen in a long time have the benefit of advanced, detailing that we can do with vintage figures now, and still look in place in the G.I. Joe world. They do look like, especially the helmeted trooper, really looks like could pass as a regular Cobra Trooper. The unmasked one that has the Cobra Officer mask, like if you painted him correctly, would look like a Secto Viper or any other generic Viper troop over the years. So, not a major step forward in what we're looking for. Until I see the actual Robo Skull test shot, I'm still not going to get too worked up over it, but it's cool that they're sharing this stuff as it's done. It gives you an idea how far along the production is at this time. They did share a couple of images of the actual Robo Skull that changes they had made. Looks like the cockpit floor, they had the original prototype pictured. It has just like 3 like octagon style design or hexagon style designs on the floor. The final design has added just a ton of like customization to that, like detailing, makes it look a lot more like an actual like vehicle. So I'm into that. And then the rear thrusters, they also have a prototype for that changed to the final design. Not as substantial a change as the cockpit floor, but again, a lot more detailing has been added, so it looks like the final product is really going to like it's really going to sing. It's going to look really, really good.
I mean, I think they look really cool. Like, I think these prototypes, test shots or whatever, I think they're super cool, really charming, and they fit in the line. You know, like the pictures, they've got Storm Shadow and, you know, and like they would, you know, especially once they're painted up, they wouldn't really look that out of place. This is going to be one that I'm like regretting not buying the figures for. I don't think there's any way that I'm like kicking myself for not getting the actual Robo Skull. But some of these figures come out and I might be really kicking myself for not getting a hold of it. But, you know, with what we'll talk about later, with all the space that I need for all my stuff that I currently have, it's hard to justify adding more stuff.
Meanwhile, I bought 2 of these. I bought 2 of the Robo Skulls because there's 2 different designs. I tried to get one of everything that I thought was really going to be interesting. So I tried to get one of each figure, and I tried to get one of every little add-on, like the little drones and all that. So I mean, I really did put a lot of money into it. I put more money into that than I did the Sky Striker. So I am anxiously awaiting, you know, whenever the actual shipment date is that. I don't know if that's supposed to happen this year, but I am hopeful that by the end of the year, maybe we'll have reached a point where it's getting ready to roll out. So April 19th was the 3-year anniversary of the death of Hector Garrido. If you are not familiar with Hector Garrido, he is a Argentine-born illustrator. He did tons and tons and tons of art for the G.I. Joe packaging line, and is probably the most well-known name of the people that worked on it, and is certainly one of the definitive artists for G.I. Joe. He did a ton of stuff. I mean, like, he did all the heavy hitters. It's a real testament that, you know, even on the anniversary of his death, people still kind of come together and reflect on, you know, just how much he affected the line. I mean, I see Hector's art at least up until, I don't know, 86, 87. I don't know how long, I don't know when he stopped doing packaging art, but he certainly did the most respected years, I think. Jaren, I know you probably have not looked at an extensive amount of original vintage card art other than maybe what's being pumped back out. Is there a particular piece of vintage art? Doesn't necessarily have to be something that Hector did, but is there something that stands out with you? Like, do you have a favorite vintage piece of art?
Does it count with the Chuckles card back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If he did 86 Hawk, he did Chuckles, I'm sure of it.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's the one I have still on card. It's one of the few things currently up being displayed in my room, so that's got a special place. Really, I mean, that's just such an iconic design, really, the way that card art popped. You know, you see it even now. I mean, it was just at WrestleMania, John Cena wore a full attire designed with that, you know, kind of an homage to that, which is really cool to see how that's tied back in. And then, you know, they're pumping it, like you said, pumping it right back into the modern collections. People like me who don't have that connection get to really respect and honor, you know, that tradition that's been passed on, and it's really cool. You know, I love art. I wish I was a talented artist. I'm not, so it makes me respect them even more. And, you know, I mean, this is something that's held the test of time. We're talking about 40 years later, and it's still just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, this art is, I mean, I can't really understate what an effect it had on children that were picking it up, because it was probably your first exposure to that, you know, to any given character at that time. And so you were using that art as a blueprint for, what's my guy, you know, what's the attitude here? How do they look when they're in action? I don't know. It was helping to bridge the gap between, this is what the figure looks like, and this is how you should envision him in your mind, because vintage figures left a lot in terms of like defining characteristics. The card art only vaguely resembled the figure because the figure just didn't have the advancements to put this level of detail into it. So yeah, the card art was a big deal for me as a kid. Definitely influenced some of my decisions as figures that I bought, and it's stuff that I still reflect on today to be like, oh man, this is what, you know, so-and-so would have looked like in battle. Looking at this Chuckles art, you know, it's actually kind of funny. It's almost like it's a really good version of Chuckles. You see a lot of different Chuckles has been represented artistically in a lot of different ways over the years, which is kind of hard to acknowledge considering he's such a minimally used character. But between this card art, the Todd McFarlane drawn G.I. Joe number 60, the G.I. Joe Cobra arc where he's an undercover guy, and even the more recent like Larry written IDWI Real American Hero run, he looks a lot different in all of them, more so than the standard Joe would shift. But the Hector Garrido art to me is almost like that, a perfect amalgamation. He's not too beefy and bulky like he was in the cartoon. He's still kind of got that Magnum PI vibe that I think is just like a real clutch part of his attitude, his behavior, his demeanor. I agree. It's an exceptional piece of card art. So Hector, we salute you. I wish I had an opportunity to interview or speak with him directly. He was pretty reserved, is my understanding. He didn't really do a lot of talking about his work overall, or perhaps he just was underappreciated in his time. And, no, I'm sure he did not get the respect he deserved when he was doing this, in the same sense that, the comic book was handed to Larry because nobody else wanted to do it. Nobody was looking at kids' toy art and thinking, this is fine art, the way we really look at it now and are like, this was defining for me as a child. So, I don't know, I hope Hector, wherever he's at, understands how much we appreciate the hard work you put into it. And he didn't just do this stuff. He did lots of pulp fiction type books. On his Wikipedia, they classify him as, his art style as good girl art. I'm not real sure what that means, unless it's like synonymous with pinup girl. It says he illustrated numerous science fiction, horror, and adventure book covers, including all the covers for the Baroness series of pulp novels, which is interesting. That's a pulp novel series that existed prior to his work on G.I. Joe. It just happened to be called The Baroness. He did some romance novels, some gothic stuff. He did Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys novels, which I would argue might even be more recognizable than his G.I. Joe art, because I read Hardy Boys books when I was in middle school, and I don't even have to look it up to know that those are the books that he did the art for. His art does have a very particular style to it. Speaking of John Cena, do you think, first of all, I saw the thing you were talking about, and I thought that shirt was very clever. I even looked into it until I saw price tag on it was like typical WWE style markup crap, where I'm like, it was like $25, maybe even $35.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not paying that. I'm not paying that is only 50% of something that I love. I'm not a wrestling guy at all. If it's your thing, that's cool. I just have no interest in it at all. Do you think John Cena would make a good G.I. Joe character or Cobra?
Oh, absolutely.
If you were fan casting him, obviously he's got the physique for it. There's, it's The Rock all over again. Is he too big to play somebody like a Duke? Or is Chuckles the kind of the go-to for that?
Man, after watching Peacemaker, I would love to see him as Chuckles. I think he'd be hilarious.
There was a report not that long ago that they were eyeing somebody for Chuckles to do a G.I. Joe spinoff. I know there's been a lot of turmoil since then, but yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. He's obviously a very talented actor. I think wrestlers in general get pushed to the side when it comes to acting chops, because they're like, they're just wrestlers. But all of wrestling is acting. And sometimes is very good acting at that. So, I can see him as Chuckles.
Chuckles would be good. I would want to see him as someone really out there. Give me him as Clean Sweep. I think that would just be a blast. And his full-on giant get-up, just giant John Cena.
Jaren, there's just no way for me to tell you that they are never going to make a G.I. Joe movie that fits in line with what you seem to want the most. You're like, welcome, G.I. Joe Origins.
Clean Sweep.
G.I. Joe Origins Clean Sweep. I'm going to make the world a cleaner place, one Cobra at a time. That was his vacuum cleaner turning on.
Only if he drives a Badger. That's the only way we're getting it. It's funny we're mentioning, we talked about John Cena. There's also CM Punk is a really big G.I. Joe fan.
Oh, that's right.
If we ever got to the point to where we could interview people, he would be top of my list, because he's got a Cobra and an Arashikage tattoo. But they've never translated onto the action figures, I guess because Mattel has the rights.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They'd have to pay them. In the same sense that we were supposed to pay the military to use Gung Ho's tattoo, that's copyright material. It's one thing to get it tattooed on you. It's another thing to start duplicating it on anything else and selling it.
Now, Greg, before we get started on the next serious topic, got a question.
Sure.
I picked up a Steam Deck, which, for those of you guys who don't know, is like a handheld PC gaming system. It's like a Switch and a PC had a love child. And I'm working on emulation. Are there any G.I. Joe games that you're like, oh, you should absolutely play this?
Yeah, absolutely there are. Not a large net of G.I. Joe video games out there in the world. And the really early ones are, unless you're just a diehard retro enthusiast, I think are skippable. There was one on the early PC systems. I'm talking like Commodore 64, probably regular PC stuff as well. I had a Commodore 64 and a Commodore 128 growing up. I realized Jaren, if you are like, oh, I know that, I will be stunned because it was a very
Commodore 64?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've almost bought one, but I was like, there's no way I'll ever play it.
My father was really invested in this system, and a lot of the software, I think it came from Germany originally, and it was, for a while there truly was an actual legitimate competitor to the PC world. This is like prior to like Windows, whatever the very first Windows 3.0. I don't remember what the first Windows was, but this was prior to that because Windows really changed the PC game in their favor in a big way. Understandably so. I mean, we still use Windows to this day. It changed the face of computer operations. But my dad was convinced that the Commodore 64, the Commodore 128, the Amiga, which was its successor by the same company, was the future. And we were invested in it heavily. Sorry, I don't know why I'm talking so much about my history other than I really enjoy that slice of my life where we were playing video games nonstop on the C64.
I'm a big like NES guy. NES, SNES. That's kind of my. I do the Atari 2600, but NES is kind of like real. NES and SNES is my sweet spot up to 64.
Right. So we're getting back on track. What I was going to say is there were two games in that era that are pretty skippable unless you are just the most diehard, player of all time because they're rough. All right. So the first G.I. Joe game is just called G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. It was released in 1985, and it's it's about as dated as it gets. Looks like it was published by Epix Incorporated, and the gist of it is that, games of this era did not have a lot of, like, backstory. So as I understand it, it's like, there's 4 Cobras, and there's 12 Joes. Holy moly, these look so bad. It's amazing that as a kid, this was considered entertainment. So basically, it was like 1v1. You were on the streets of like the city in this particular shot, and there's a snake armor running around, and it's just Snake Eyes and Baroness trying to fight each other. I don't know if this was PvP, like if you played it with 2 players, but it looks like the goal was you would basically play 8 total levels, and then the levels sometimes had vehicle parts in it, and sometimes you were just fighting off against the Cobras. Pretty rough, and I mean, only a novelty to the diehard enthusiast. I feel like you have to be a huge fan of both G.I. Joe and extremely old video games to find any sense of value in it. It's a hard pass. The other one. G.I. Joe 2, The Smurf Massacre. Oh my god, where do I even start? A level purloined from the Commodore game G.I. Joe has been transformed into this ridiculous Smurf-hating extravaganza. It's a homebrew game, which if you don't know, it means that a fan took an existing game, they edited it, sometimes substantially, sometimes not so much. They made a new game out of it. And for whatever reason, this person decided that they wanted the G.I. Joes to fight the Smurfs. Maybe that was their least favorite cartoon growing up, and G.I. Joe was their absolute favorite growing up. Okay, so you got some Smurfs running around the front. You've got 4 weapons. There's a regular machine gun, there's a mortar, there's a tank, and there's like an atomic bomb. You can kind of see where this is going. So I played that one, the original one on the C64. I'm pretty sure it was on other systems as well at that time. Maybe not. Maybe it was only on the C64. All right. Well, anyway, that one's an easy skip. It's really, really outdated. After that, they released 2 Nintendo video game titles, and they are both awesome. They are pretty standard, Nintendo era stuff. One of them is called G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, and the second one they made is called G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, The Atlantis Factor. They both revolve around what was kind of going on in the toy line that time. Like the G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero one is littered with like 1988, 1989 characters. The cover's got Captain Gridiron and Blizzard. The roster in general is a little is a little out there because it's just like reading the comic at the time. It's limited to who they were selling, who was in the store shelves at that time. Both of these games are different from one another, but share a lot of similarities. I mean, you know what you're getting into with a Nintendo title. There's not a lot of like plot or backstory typically, and it's mostly unfair action designed around making you play the game for far longer than it should take to beat. But I recommend both of them. I own both of these original Nintendo titles. I've played them many, many, many times, and I love them. I loved them then, and I've never finished either one of them. They're both. I mean, how many? I know you're much younger, but have you played a lot of Nintendo titles? Just regular NES games?
Yeah, quite a few.
Have you beat any?
No.
I am hard pressed to think of a Nintendo title that I have actually made. I mean, Mario, for sure. And then after that,
I've rolled Duck Hunt. That's about it. Because there's no actual end to Duck Hunt. You just go to like level 99 and then start back over, and then your score goes to like 1 billion and then starts over. So I've completed that cycle, but
I beat the original DuckTales because somebody bought it. I was a Christmas gift for my grandmother that year, and I beat Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. I remember that. After that, it starts to fall off. And I mean, there's a lot of games I have played a lot of and didn't finish. Games like Castlevania, Battletoads, Ninja Gaiden, those games are all just like, the difficulty just is insane. Battletoads was like, you get like 3 continues and then you had to start the whole game over. And then so you're like 9 levels in and they put in a level where you'd have to memorize all these obstacles. You just like, your reaction time could not dodge them. You had to remember where they were. So you'd burn up all your continues and you'd have to start over, and it was a whole thing. Like, it's a pretty classic Nintendo style. So anyway, yeah. I haven't beat either one of them. I should go back someday and really grind it out because I do love both of them, and I'm sure the later levels are just as entertaining. I've probably watched playthroughs of them more than once, but it's been a while. I skipped one. The Atari 2600 had a game called G.I. Joe Cobra Strike, and it is also easily avoidable. Just like the Commodore 64 era stuff, it's just too old.
You'd be surprised. I've probably got about 40 different Atari 2600 games.
Really? I have never... Atari 2600 was not something I had as a kid, so I didn't play them then, and like many things, I feel like if you don't have that nostalgia for it, it just doesn't carry over as well.
I don't know why. I love that paddle controller. That's like... It just feels like video games to me.
I do own this Atari 2600 game. It's not very valuable. I own one in the box and everything. And the game itself is just like, it's so disconnected. There's a gigantic snake, and it wiggles back and forth, and it shoots lasers down, kind of like Space Invaders style. You've got these dudes running around, and you're trying to keep them alive by blocking the shots from the snake, and then also there's like some side cannons that try to damage it. And that's it. Even in this playthrough, I don't see like an end screen. It doesn't, I don't know. I don't know why the game ends. Anyway, easy skip. I wouldn't start with anything earlier than the regular Nintendo era stuff. Good for the novelty, and that's it. After the 2 Nintendo games that I think most fans are very fond of for whatever reason, after the Nintendo titles, we really only got one major release that I can remember. That's not like, play this Gunship Battle mashup or Smite times G.I. Joe, and that was the Rise of Cobra video game. Oh, I'm sorry. Obviously, I've forgotten that they made a next-gen one that we've talked about before, but they made a Rise of Cobra video game that was a direct tie-in with the movie at the time. It's most well known for being the first appearance of Helix because she was designed for this video game, and they made a little comic with her in it, and she became, they made a figure also, and then she became kind of popular based on that. The G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra video game, which was on like the 360, the PS3, probably the original Wii, PlayStation 2, maybe PC, but for sure all the others, is a kind of low budget. It's the kind of thing that you would have seen on the marketplace now, like Xbox Arcade or whatever, like kind of a budget title. Plays like a 3D Contra, where you're mostly just running and gunning, and it's like top-down Diablo view. And, people didn't really like this game, but I think it's pretty good, actually. It's not gonna like change your life for sure, but the like old schoolness of it is, I actually think is really pretty fun. played through this game, got both. There's like a secret ending for beating it on the hardest difficulty. I did all of that. I got every achievement. Like, I don't mess around with the G.I. Joe video games. It doesn't matter if they're good or not. The Metacritic score on this would argue that it is not a good game. The user score is 5.3 out of 10. The Metacritic score is a 32. So I'm willing to acknowledge that, like the movie itself, it may be an acquired taste, but I think it's worth playing. I think it's okay. Maybe I am the only person that feels that way, but I liked it. And when you start to unlock other characters to play as, I thought it was really, really good. And then obviously the one that came out on the Xbox One, PlayStation 4 era, Operation Blackout, is pretty bad. You know, we talked about it at length at that time, and it's only gotten worse since then, in my opinion. It again had some really bad controls, especially, but it was lacking in other ways as well. Was perfectly fine to play through, but it was a very low budget game. People always pop up and they're like, hey man, won't you just make a G.I. Joe that's like Call of Duty? And I'm like, well, probably, because it takes billions of dollars to make a Call of Duty, and the return on investment from a G.I. Joe title is not there. People that play Call of Duty, the majority of people, are young kids that don't care about G.I. Joe, so they're not going to mess around with it. So there's probably never going to be a quote-unquote AAA G.I. Joe title. I don't think those days are ever going to happen again, where it's just that big of a property. I do think the right developer with the right approach could make a really good G.I. Joe game. And I think if we look away from the Call of Duty concept, which again is just not feasible, I think there's something to be said for a strategy-based game like XCOM. You know, those guys recently did a Marvel Midnight Suns video game where it's all turn-based tactical strategy with a team. I think that would actually be a lot of fun. Or like that Mario and Rabbids game that's on the Switch, where you take turns moving, you are choosing your tactical style. I think that would be an affordable title to make, and B, is in line with G.I. Joe, right? It's all strategy, tactics, military stuff. You could have individual units, you could upgrade and have vehicles, you could build bases. I think that's a pretty solid idea. I'm not saying there's no room for a run and gun G.I. Joe game out there. I'm saying that the money just doesn't seem to be there to support it at the level to make it, good. I'll just put a fine point on it. There's not enough money to make a good one. There's enough money to make a crappy one.
I still think they need to get with Rogue Company. That game is exactly what a G.I. Joe shooter, in my opinion, should be. It's like an arena-based. Every character has their own abilities and weapons and things. And they've already, that game is doing crossovers with, like, The Walking Dead did a crossover with them. So the game's doing crossovers. We just need Hasbro to reach out and make it happen.
I would still argue that, video game industry for Star Wars is just not the same as it is for G.I. Joe. That they probably can't even afford to make a game of that caliber on the budget that they are working with. It does kind of make me wonder why, there are some Transformers games that aren't too bad. There's some bad ones of those also, but it seems like they typically
the one made by Platinum was really good.
Yeah, it seems like more often than not, they get a little bit of a better shake when it comes to these type of games. And, I don't really know anything about Transformers. I know the very, very minimal stuff. And so I don't know if Transformers is truly that much more popular than other Hasbro properties, or is it just because they were making a lot of movies and, for an extended period of time, and so that, leaned into the finances on it. I haven't seen a Transformers game in a while, but I also am not out there actively looking at what they're making, so for all I know, there's a dozen great ones. Anyway, yeah, my recommendation is definitely play the two Nintendo ones, and if you're feeling quirky, play the 360 one. It's really not that bad. It just is very dated, and it has Helix in it, my favorite character, so there's what more could you want? I would also like to see a game like this, like you could unlock alternate outfits, like in Marvel Ultimate Alliance and X-Men Legends. You would play as the heroes, and if you did challenges and stuff, you'd unlock other outfits they've worn over time. And I think G.I. Joe would be great for that as well. You could unlock, the V2 outfit, the V3 outfit. Maybe they could design outfits for the game. I don't know. Anyway, I'm saying it's there. It could be done. I just don't think there's enough interest to make it happen. And we've seen in the media industry overall, we've had a lot of flops, right? The Snake Eyes movie sucked. The last video game was poorly received. It lowers the interest to do it at all, much less do it properly. But as somebody that loves video games and has loved video games his whole life, it is painful to be like, wow, I got to go all the way back to the Nintendo era to play a game that I'm really genuinely interested in. So Yeah. Anyway, that's what I recommend. If you have played any or all of these video games, you could write us in and let us know your thoughts on them. If you want to defend or perhaps more likely attack the views on some of these not great games, we're here to hear it. You can find Jaren on Instagram at Anything Joe's Pod. You can find me on Twitter at the same location. You can email us directly at Anything Joe's Podcast or anythingjoespod@gmail.com. Let me know what you feel about the G.I. Joe video game. Do not write me in and be like, I think they should make a Call of Duty one, because that's not going to work. I do know enough about the video game industry to know why that's not feasible, unfortunately. So, on to the last part. Jaren, you and I have been working on similar concepts in our individual toy rooms in two different ways. You've recently bought a new house. You have a dedicated room that's going to house your toys. I have a toy room that I love, but it's chaos. And I have been working for a long time to come up with a system to sort the everything, the accessories, the bibs and bobs, the stuff that doesn't have a home anywhere else. So I wanted to talk about those two things briefly. And I'm going to start with you. The last time we talked, you were using some kind of software program to kind of get a ballpark for what your room was going to look like. Mm-hmm. Can you give me just a ballpark? What's the size of your room, roughly?
This is like my weakest thing. I would say probably like a 11 by like a little over 100 square feet.
Okay.
Does that sound like a normal bedroom size?
What would you, if you didn't see it beforehand, what would you assume that this room was being used for before you guys bought it?
A kid's bedroom would be my guess.
Okay.
Like a decent sized bedroom, not a tiny bedroom. I've definitely had smaller rooms. I know that it's big enough for our foster care that it could have been a bedroom.
So your plan is, if I'm remembering correctly, you want to have kind of like a wall for each property that you're heavily invested in. Is that kind of accurate?
That is accurate, yeah. So I'm trying to convince my wife to build me shelves. If I haven't talked about my wife on the show enough, she is avid hobbyist in regards to that kind of thing. If my room is underneath in priority her laundry room. She wants to get her shelves built. But then mine are coming, so she's going to do all that fun stuff.
My wife paid for the shelves that I have now, but to be designed by a guy that kind of did it on the side, and probably still wouldn't have them if she hadn't, taken the initiative there. So I am very thankful for that because I think it turned out great. So tell me what these 4 properties are. I mean, I can guess. One of them is obviously Star Wars.
Yep.
And then I'm guessing another one is G.I. Joe.
Yep.
Okay. What else?
DC Comics. So I've got my McFarlanes and then I've got actual comic books.
How far back does that go? When did you start?
The DC Comics, I've been doing all the McFarlanes.
Okay.
From the original. I have every figure from the first year and a half.
Oh.
I was completely current.
Right on.
And now they're releasing way too fast. So there's no chance. And way too many. I don't need 80 different Batmen.
Yeah.
60 is plenty.
60 is my max.
So.
And what's
no more.
What's this mysterious fourth wall?
That's gonna be Lego. So that's gonna be where we build all of our. My goal is to eventually have like a full on like cityscape.
Oh, yeah.
Like on one big shelf because I like to build things with my kids and then like hide minifigures and try to find them. So we'll be like, hey, find the banana guy, and so you have to look through and find him. It's a really fun way to hang out and play with Legos.
That's awesome. We don't have a lot of Legos in our house because they are expensive, and if you don't have somewhere dedicated to display them, it doesn't really work out, I feel like. But I've collected a few over the years that are kind of sprinkled around the house. I have a Millennium Falcon from probably around the time episode 7 came out, which I love. Okay, was a great build. I got the Ghostbusters Ecto-1 when they first licensed that because I was like, oh man.
That's a good one.
Yeah, but the bulk of what I have is the G.I. Joe Creo line, which was like the knockoff Legos. And it didn't last very long, but I was a very good line in my opinion. Like was not better than a knockoff, quite frankly. Like Creo stuff, I think is pretty well done. The engineering on it is good. They did a Terrordrome that was great. And they're not really that expensive. I've collected many of the figures. You can buy the individual figures, which were blind bagged mostly, like I don't know, $5-6 a pop. It's pretty affordable. So I bought a lot of that, and I have those out in display cases. Anyway, enough about me. So roughly, I know this is hard. If you asked me this, I would tailspin. How many figures do you think you have altogether?
Oh my gosh. With all the scales and everything, I don't know.
What do you have the most of?
I've got a whole lot of Black Series because I'm an army builder. So, I've got 4 of one type of Mandalorian, and I've got 6 of another, and I've got 10 of each, or not 10, but probably 6 of one type of clone trooper, and 4 of another, and 4 of another, and and they've released a whole bunch. Normally with like clone troopers, I like to get 4. That was my number, which I've slowed down. I haven't picked up a couple of the newest ones, but then 3 3/4. I've still got a lot of random Star Wars stuff, and I've picked up a whole lot of OG O-ring Joes. I've definitely bumped that up a lot in the last couple years. That's going to be a big undertaking trying to get those all up.
Well, that's one of the good things about collecting at a 4-inch scale versus a 6-inch scale is that you really can get away with a lot more. So, do you have an idea of how you're going to... I mean, obviously you got one wall per product, which I think is great, and will look, when it's all filled up, will be real cool to look at. Are you going to set them up like in a diorama style? Are you going to just kind of do what I do, which is just sort of display them all, profile mode? Do you have a plan for if you have more of X than you have wall?
Yeah, so, and I've talked to a few people on Instagram, and people have sent me pictures and stuff, and one of the things that I like is the kind of simplicity. Like Patrick Davis, he did a great job. He sent us pictures of his collection is like so organized, and it looks very clean, and I like that. Alan Grant, he sent some photos in. His collection is really clean. And I like how, and I'm not saying they don't have a lot of stuff because they probably have more stuff than me, both of them, but they make it look where it's not just like crazy crowded. And in my old space, it looked very crowded. And so I'm kind of trying to, I don't think I'll have everything on display. I'll probably, all the clone troopers, I'll probably display 1 of each. And then I'll have some to take out, and if I get back into doing toy photography like I had been doing. And then O-ring Joes, I'm going to start kind of parsing some of those out and kind of selling some of the ones that I don't find a connection with. Obviously I'm going to keep all my Eco Warriors and my Star Brigade, all the really good ones. And then just the biggest thing has been trying to stop buying stuff. I've only purchased a couple Black Series this year, a couple DC Universe, and then I'm going to stay current on G.I. Joe Classified, with the exception of some of the Walmart stuff. I have no desire for the Zartan that just is popping up. I don't need a 4th different Zartan with just slightly altered colors. I don't.
Yeah, it was like the 3rd or 4th release already of a Zartan, so I totally get that.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. But so, yeah, I'll probably... Well, and another thing, I want this room to be also a filming space, so if we want to start getting things on video. So I also want to make sure that I have enough room to move around. I'm going to try to keep the whole middle of the room empty so that I can move around. I can bring things out and play with them with the kids. I can build Legos on the floor and that kind of stuff. So we're really going to need to maximize the space on the shelving. It has a little cutout for the AC vent, or whatever those things are called. Mm-hmm. So I'm probably going to put some figures up along that as well, just to kind of utilize that extra space as like a little shelf. I've got a decent plan on how to get it all worked out. It's just I need to organize everything back to where I had it before I can get everything up.
That's awesome. I can't wait till you actually are getting started on it. And I would be happy to come up and help you organize non-Star Wars things if you need an extra set of hands.
Absolutely. I'll take up on that. One of the things that I've been thinking about that I think will be fun is I'll probably do a highlight wall, because I'm always really bad about tinkering with things when they're new. So I'll probably have a pretty, probably near the entrance and near where my desk will be, where I'll have all the newest stuff that has come in, and kind of those things will kind of rotate in and out. Or just a figure that I find interesting at that time. I recently got back into all the Mandalorian figures because the show's out. So I had all those back out. So something like that. So I'll keep kind of on a rotating basis.
I like that. I wish I also had I had a spot that was kind of like a just in spot, and instead what I have to do now is, it seems like every time I get something new, especially in the 4-inch scale, I used my shelves to their full capacity right off the bat. So anytime I get something new or get a figure that I didn't have, it requires a substantial amount of reorganization, which I have not done even once. So instead, like the retro line, the actual like vintage retro line that's been coming out sporadically, those figures I'm always like, you guys are just going to have to drive a vehicle or sit on a playset, because I just like the Sky Striker guys that came with that. I was like, you guys are just going to have to go on the flag. The catch-all for every spare thing I've got in my room is just put it on the flag, because I don't have any shelf space for them. And that does bum me out. I'm hopeful that someday I can figure out a way to rework things and get kind of everybody on there, but it's just not feasible right now. All right, so we'll check back with that. If you have any thoughts on what Jaren's up to or any ideas on how to make that process smoother, please write us in, let us know. Or it's all trial and error when it comes to this stuff. When I started laying out this room, I only knew what I wanted it to look like in my mind based on what my previous toy rooms had looked like. So it wasn't until stuff started actually like popping up that I was like, okay, this can go here and this can go here. So it's always kind of a work in progress. I need to have shelves made for my actual vehicles in a way that allows me to get more of them displayed. And it's so expensive that I'm just like, it's going to have to wait another couple of years bare minimum before I can even like bring it up as a project. But speaking of organization, let's flip over to what I've been doing. For the past forever, I have not done a very good job of keeping my figures and accessories sorted. That might be a bit of an understatement, because since I was a child up until my adult years, I basically would open a figure, play with the figure, and then I would put the accessories kind of in a plastic tub, just kind of all together. And so what I learned is eventually you reach a point where you have 5,000 plus accessories and no way of knowing who they go with anymore. You know, some of this stuff has been reused and reused so often, I'll pull a gun out, finally identify it, only to find it goes with like any of 12 characters. So I'm like, well, how do I know which one to even put it with? I'm specifically speaking of the like late 90s, early 2000s era stuff where they were just like only reusing what they had on hand. And so they reused a lot of stuff over and over and over and over and over again. And that applies, all of my modern accessories are like that. And there is definitely a couple of windows where figures would come with 20 plus accessories, more than they could possibly carry. And so the process of identifying them has just been, it's just very defeating, because you're just like, I don't know if I'll ever get through all of this, and I don't know what to do with it in the meantime. So this is what I've done. I had started buying tackle boxes, which is a very common way to store G.I. Joes for collectors, especially if you don't have anywhere else to put them. But I'm fortunate that most of my figures are out on display. However, most of them can't carry every single thing they came with. So what I've done is I've started breaking these tackle boxes apart by year. You get 4, 8, 12, you get about 12 spots for figures per box. And I'll put a big label on the front of it. It'll say 1983. And it'll list every figure that came out in 1983. So if I am identifying parts and I find something from 1983, Airborne's gun or parachute or something, and he doesn't have it on him, can't wear it for whatever reason, maybe too much stuff, or maybe it's a duplicate, this is where it goes. Now, this is not a perfect system, because if there are 25 figures that came out in 1983, which I know there's not, but you only have 12 spots, you've got some bleed over. But what I was finding was when I started making the slots, my original goal was 1 spot for every figure. The end. And that is a lot of tackle boxes. Probably over 100, just roughly. And there was a lot of dead space there. So, especially in the early years, they really could pretty much handle everything they came with. Backpack, gun, binoculars, you're done. So what I was seeing was I got a lot of cases that are labeled that have no purpose to be there because they're not carrying anything. I'm not trying to hold on to duplicate accessories. I'm not trying to hold on to duplicate anything, quite frankly. And so I changed to this new mode where I was like, there's a spot for it. Yes, it might bleed over with another character, but it still narrows down what I'm looking for to 12 specific spots, and I know it's in one of these 12 spots. And I'm at the point now where I have labeled and made spots for everything from 1982 up to 2003, and then it resumes in like 2013 to basically the end of the retro line, the modern retro line that they stopped making figures for recently. So I've only got to span 2003 to 2013, which if you know a lot about G.I. Joes, you might know the reason I've skipped it is because they are some of the most intensive released years that are out there. They had just started rolling out awkward year figures. They were reusing molds. There was repaints. They came with tons of stuff. It rolls into like the movie tie-ins, like where the Rise of Cobra rollout especially was substantial. Tons and tons of figures those years. It's going to take multiple cases, even if I allow 24 figures per 12 spots. It's still going to take multiple cases per year. So I've slowed down a little bit there, but I've still made more progress than I've ever made on this project. And I have sorted a lot of stuff. One of the nice things about sorting is there's not a lot of vintage stuff that I won't say that I know what it goes to, but I do know how to recognize a vintage part versus a modern part. And I think I have probably pulled every vintage accessory out, and I have put it with the figure, or I've put it up in the case, which is a pretty big benchmark for me. One, because now I have an opportunity to shop for accessories in my vintage collection that I'm missing. And also because I know that I'm not going to come across any of them, or it's very, very unlikely. So here's the hard part. Everything post-vintage is not covered very well online. Yojo doesn't have a Who bit for modern era figures at all, and is kind of spotty on the in-between years in terms of what goes with Who and the pictures that go along with it. The only guide that I can really think of that lays out the weapons and shows you what they were looking like is James Cavanaugh's book series, Rank and File, which is got, there's like 4 volumes of it, and it has every figure, in order. It shows everything that they came with. It is a great resource. It is only available in print, first of all, which is not a deal breaker because I do own all of these, and I think it's a great resource for modern collectors. But again, there's no Who bit. So what this comes down to is, imagine that you have a complete modern line, and also imagine that you didn't keep any of the stuff with the characters that you went with. I'm asking you this, Jaren. I'm asking you this, the listeners. What do you do? Do I open the book, point out a figure, identify the gun, and then sort until I find this gun? A gun that might not even be in there. I have no idea how much stuff is missing, who's complete and who's not. Or do I pull out a weapon and go, I know this is a modern weapon, and then start extensively researching 4 volumes worth of stuff until I'm like, oh, this is the gun that goes with Torpedo or whoever. Both of these processes sound very tedious and potentially not very successful. I have to sort a lot of stuff. I mean, an inconceivable amount of stuff. There are lots of duplicates in these parts. Neither one of these options seems like they're going to yield results in the time frame that I'm hoping for. I would like to get all this stuff sorted before I die, and I don't even know if that's a feasible option because there's so much of it. So I'm asking you, Jaren, if this was your undertaking, what do you do?
That is a lot of work. I mean, not having the resources is hard. Having the resources but a million different little pieces sounds even worse. I don't know if there's a right way. I would just sell everything and buy it all over again.
Well, let's not be crazy.
Just bite the bullet. You got the big bucks, okay?
I have at times bought characters with that in mind, just to be like, this guy has 25 parts. It's only a $10 figure. I'm just going to buy it, and then I can mark it off and know. At some point, I spent a lot of time making a vehicle checklist. And for the first time in my life, it is an extremely thorough, comprehensive look at what I have and what I need. And I can shop off of it. I made a real rudimentary checklist where I just took a bunch of screenshots and then started drawing red X's through them if they were 100% complete. And if they weren't, I made a note and I said, hey, the mobile command center is missing that engine or that radar dish or that seat belt or whatever. And so if I'm looking for parts for vehicles, I have never been in a better situation to shop to complete vehicles. If I don't mark it off, I know I'm either missing it in its entirety or I'm missing something from it. And if I'm missing something from it, I now have a resource to look at what that is. My figures are not like that. I do not have a checklist of any 1 year of figures that are complete because it is not only a ton of work, but I never know if what I'm missing is truly missing. I don't get wrapped up in completionism as a whole. I got a pretty easy take on it. And modern figures in general, mostly because they came with so much repetitive stuff they couldn't hold or stuff that didn't fit them, I'm not really that tied up with it. If I have a lot of modern figures that are incomplete. As long as it's not an outfit piece, like a beret or something, I don't really care. But I do want to sort what I have for the sake of having it all lined out. If I decided to sell any of this stuff, I want to be able to just go to it, know that it's 100% complete, sell it. So anyway, what I was getting at is I have bought figures in the past, A, to complete them so I don't have to worry about finding the parts, or B, I've brought them home only to find out that I had this stuff I bought it for anyway. I bought a Crazy Legs at Winterfest. It was the one vintage figure I bought. And I was like, I don't think he has his gun. And then I got him home. He's got it. And he's got his parachute. I got the stock out of it. I paid like $15 for the little stock on his gun. And now I have an extra Crazy Legs also. So I'm not very good at that part of it. But I'm hoping that as I get better at this, I'll be able to complete more of my vintage run, which has still always kind of been my go-to. I pivot a lot on what I'm collecting with the most interest, and I've been doing vehicles for at least a year because I know we talk about it a lot because there was just so much missing, and I've come so far with that collection that I'm able to be like, well, if you want to work on completing some more vintage figures, I got no issues with that. So I'm trying to open that doorway back up. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. What I'm saying is I just don't know what to do with and how I would love. I've asked for a lot of input from the audience, but if you have overcome a similar obstacle, if you have a plan of action that is eluding us, I would love to hear it because I really do feel quite lost. Some days I'll bring a bin out, just start rummaging through it, and just to see if something like triggers a memory that I'm like, well, maybe this is this. I'll look it up. But again, because there's no resource for modern architecture, like with what's what, I just don't know how to accomplish it. I tried to prioritize FSS con really rare figures because I found a lot of those parts just kind of mixed in. FSS and con, anything produced by the club, their accessories are somehow different. The plastic is different. I don't know how to explain it, but when you've been around them long enough, you can see them and go, there's something off about this. And that usually means it goes to one of those figures. And obviously club exclusive figures are some of the most valuable modern figures out there. And so it's kind of sickens me that I'm like, I don't even know where this stuff is at. Stuff that I paid a premium for and I've already kind of like misplaced it. And I was able to sort some of that stuff finally because I have an actual tackle box to put it in. So I have been prioritizing that because it's easier to find and is important that I know where that stuff is with the figure, because if I sell, like this week, I found the accessories for my FSS cover girl, which is like a $100 figure easily, but I was like, she doesn't have anything. And so I found her machine gun and her pistol and I was able to correctly identify it. Actually, I think Joel from Order of Battle, who is an absolute powerhouse at that type of stuff, was like, here, just take a picture of them. And he's just like, this goes here, 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 and here. I need somebody like Joel actively in my house working with me because that would be the third option, right? Is to either become a savant at the accessories of G.I. Joe or work with someone that can just look at it and put you in narrow it down to 3 suspects. So anyway, that journey continues, just not very quickly. There was a point, there was probably 5 to 10 years of my life where when I was displaying my G.I. Joes, none of them had anything. It was all just hundreds of figures standing at attention, basically. And so much so that when I would show people my collection, which was rare, people would be like, hey, why don't they have any of the weapons? And I was like, well, it's because I don't have any of them organized. But now my vintage collection looks good. I don't have a ton of complete vintage figures, but everything I have is in the hand or in the case of the person it goes with. So that's a good feeling. And also shows me that even if the timeline is long enough, there is a chance that the progress will continue. I got to pull these rank and file books out and start looking through them kind of in my casual time, which is not existent. That's actually code for the bathroom. And just start looking at stuff and being like, all right, these are some weapons from this era, kind of memorize a chunk of them, like a dozen of them at once or something, and then start going through them for that. I forgot to mention this, but I sorted all the accessories into categories to make it easier, which I think is really important. So I've just got like all my machine guns are here. All my like bladed weapons are here because I don't have the room to do knives, swords, katanas, whatever. Backpacks here, headwear here. So I've done some preliminary work that I thought would make the process easier, but ultimately it's still not. You're still looking through 1,500 machine guns for the one that looks like the one that you want. Don't even get me started on pistols that are so similarly looking, are almost no unique pistols in the G.I. Joe world to me, that I have to like zoom in so extensively, put the actual piece beside it. I'm going on a tirade about it, but that's where I'm at. I'm working on it, but I'm desperate for input on how to get better at it, to do more. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back in 2 short weeks with more content. You can reach out to our email at anythingjoespod or anythingjoespodcast@gmail.com, and we would love to hear your thoughts on anything we've talked about today. And we look forward to talking to you again in just 2 short weeks, where anything's available for discussion here on Anything Joes.